please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
President Trump really racking up the frequent flyer miles on Air Force One. He's headed to South Korea today after wrapping up a trip to Japan. Akiko and Sherry are on the ground and have our intel. Let's kick it off with Akiko. Akiko, the way President Trump is now tweeting about this massive military buildup happening in Japan, man, the president's going to rewrite Article 9 of the Constitution for Abe.
We saw a bit of that exchange in the press conference yesterday, Bernie. You're exactly right. The president is set to take off from Yokota Air Base here in Japan around 9:50 a.m. local, and the U.S. needed equal and reliable access to the Japanese markets. He singled out the car industry, saying how few American cars were actually sold here on the ground. But he did try to be a bit more diplomatic in the press conference, saying that things could be negotiated out in a friendly way. That still has to raise some concerns for Japan, though, at a time when they've really been trying to build on this U.S.-Japan security alliance in the face of the North Korean threat. The Prime Minister yesterday talking about building Japan's defense capabilities. He also talked about buying additional F-35 fighter jets and missile interceptors from the U.S., although that is an announcement that was made prior to this trip as well. That prompted the president to prod the prime minister along to say he should buy even more to create U.S. jobs. And when asked about whether Japan should have shot down those North Korean missiles that flew over Japan earlier this year, this is what he had to say.
I will say, if I could just take a piece of the Prime Minister's answer, he will shoot them out of the sky when he completes the purchase of lots of additional military equipment from the United States. He will easily shoot them out of the sky, just like we shot something out of the sky the other day in Saudi Arabia, as you saw.
Now, there was no major announcement made on that front, but as you pointed out, Bernie, the president's really building on those comments again this morning, tweeting out, "My visit to Japan and friendship with Prime Minister Abe will yield many benefits for our great country. Massive military and energy orders happening." We'll be watching closely to see if there's any announcements in the coming days. Bernie?
Akiko, the media was looking for some faux pas by the president. I guess one of the ones they caught him out on was talking about cars. I think he made some comment to business leaders about how Japan shouldn't just sell cars in America, but they should make cars in America. Something they've been doing for about 40 years last time I checked.
You're exactly right about that. And the Japanese Trade Association, the car association here, would argue that, when you look broadly here, Japanese car makers build about 75% of the cars that are sold in the U.S. in the U.S. And that's a point that the Prime Minister, as well as his administration, has really been trying to press the U.S. on. You'll recall at the very first visit to the White House earlier this year, Japan talked about passing along some tweetable figures so that the U.S. would understand more clearly exactly how many jobs these car makers create and just how much they make in America. You can expect that dialogue to continue, especially in light of the comments President made here in Japan on this trip.
Yeah, Akiko, I also caught the brouhaha about Trump apparently losing patience and throwing all the fish food into the koi pond, but I checked the tape and rewound. Abe actually did it first, so Trump was only following his lead, okay? Fake news! Anyway, okay. All right, thanks, Akiko. Good stuff there. Let's get... All right, thanks, Akiko. Let's get out to Sherry in Seoul, where Trump is due to arrive this afternoon, just in time for lunch and then tea with Moon Jae-in and the First Lady of South Korea. Going to be a tough act to follow. I mean, the golf and all the multiple meals together, and he's going to have a very shortened time, relatively speaking, in South Korea, right, Sherry?
Exactly. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has a little bit of preview of what he can expect from President Trump's visit in Japan. So they may not be able to cozy up like he did with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Well, yes, the shortest leg in his 5 Asian nation tour. But certainly, when you want to talk about agenda, North Korea is very much expected high up on the agenda items, of course. But let's talk about a little bit of a business side, because we're just talking about you and Kiko were just talking about how he was already tweeting about that massive military and energy orders coming from Japan. Is that what he has in mind when he's visiting South Korea this afternoon? And there will be other items such as a free trade agreement. Of course, he had already called it a horrible deal. So there are moves to already make amendments to this free trade agreement that is expected early next year. But what kind of tone and what kind of degree of changes that he's going to call for in this particular deal is very much in question. But of course, there are other items. South Korea's Moon is going to want to talk about the transfer of wartime operational control. And does Trump have potential arms deal and potential sharing a defense cost issue in his mind when he's visiting South Korea this afternoon? So many questions. Bernie, back over to you.
Is likely to be moving today. Nissan Motor in the news. They're planning to restart domestic vehicle production today. They were suspended last month after that case of uncertified technicians discovered to have been signing off on final inspections for decades. Japan telco major SoftBank has its Vision Fund to thank for the increase in quarterly operating earnings, and CEO Masa Son is still talking up the future for their U.S. Sprint unit after merger discussions with T-Mobile ended in a big dropped call. Dan has more on that. Dan, Masa Son is saying that next few years might be kind of tough, but in the end there will be fruit born, and is basically telling the market, be patient with me, right?
Very much so, Bernie, and a very optimistic dial tone coming from Masayoshi Son on the earnings call. We are, of course, watching SoftBank shares this session, given the barrage of news flow around the company right now. Chief among that news is, of course, earnings. As you mentioned, we saw SoftBank reporting a 21% rise in Q2 profit thanks to the growing value of its tech investments. Now, of note is that $93 billion Vision Fund. It posted operating income of 186.2 billion yen thanks to its stakes in the chipmaker Nvidia and other businesses like WeWork and Didi Chuxing. And of course, the company is still finalizing its investments in Uber. And Masayoshi-san used the earnings call to warn shareholders that he could still walk away and perhaps even invest in Uber's rival Lyft if he didn't get the right deal. Now, the second matter influencing the share price this session is, of course, that failed T-Mobile deal. Masayoshi-san had been trying to put a deal together to combine Sprint and T-Mobile. A battle over governance and control ended in the deal getting nixed for a second time. He spent most of the earnings call explaining why Sprint abandoned the talks, but he said, I feel good about this decision. Even if it is tough for the next 3 or 4 years on a 5 to 10 year timescale, it is strategically an indispensable company. SoftBank now plans to raise its stake in Sprint to 85%, but says the door is still open if its management rights are preserved. It does mean that Sprint will now have to essentially fight it alone against those 3 bigger rivals in the US domestic telco market, Bernie.
Yeah, they're still pretty big, but yeah, they're way behind AT&T, Verizon, and of course T-Mobile. But it came down to apparently to Dan, operational control and the fact that he wasn't going to be in charge, and he just couldn't bear that. Thanks, Dan. Markets in South Korea kicked off at the trade at the top of the hour. June, I guess the country is very occupied with the presidential meetings today, but the market does go on, right?
Yes, Bernie, very preoccupied. We're looking at a pretty flat open for the Korean markets, but we are looking at a massive rally for the retailers this morning, with Shinsegae opening up by its first stage daily trading limit just 2 minutes into trade, opening up 12% at the start, now up about 7.5%. And you're looking at the other retailers also higher as well. So you're looking at Shinsegae up on the back of a earnings surprise, both their duty-free stores and the department stores beating market expectations. So a very strong open there. A Squawk Box will be right back with much more. Stay with us. Back in 2.